The amount of natural resources in a given area is not something created, not something we know. The idea we're running out of natural resources is the silliest idea around. We don't know how many natural resources we've got in that chair. A natural resource exists when we've written an equation that shows us something about the universe that reveals how we can get power out of it, how much power we can get out of a couple of yards of tennis court. Remains to be seen. The sunlight in the tennis court is probably enough to power a city if we learn how to transmit it efficiently. The coal in the United States wasn't worth anything until Watt invented the steam engine. And the coal was not just another stone, it was a useful stone. Natural resources are created by mathematical analysis and technological tinkering. So we've got scientific relative truth, mathematical relative truth, legal relative truth, and historical relative truth, and they're all different. And we haven't even got the lies yet. And already we can see how oversimplified the Aristotelian game is. Henry VIII had 6 wives. 1/4 of the class doubted that. Well, there are people here who know a lot more about history than I do. Those who doubted that Henry VIII had 6 wives, would one of them please explain the grounds for your dissent on that? Well, I thought universally accepted.
Within the Catholic game, wasn't 1 or 2 of his marriages annulled?
Ah, hey, that's very good. Henry VIII had 6 wives is only true in the historical game, which is written according to certain laws of alleged objectivity.
I think by historical is only written by history, written by winners. You don't hear the other side.
I know, that's another point. But this is not theological truth. In the Catholic game, theologically, Henry VIII only had, I don't know how many wives, depending on which annulments were granted by the Vatican and which annulments were denied. So the number of Henry VIII's wives is not constant. It depends on whether you're looking at it historically or theologically.
Or who writes the history for that?
And then there's the other thing. What is historical truth compared to scientific truth? Every country writes history to suit itself. Even contemporary history. I've lived in Ireland for 6 years, and we got 6 television stations there. 2 from England, 2 from Ireland, and 2 from Northern Ireland. And if you look at the news any evening, you get 3 different versions of every news story. You get the English version, the Northern Irish version, which is Scotch-Irish capitalists, the owner class of Northern Ireland. You never get the point of view of the worker class of Northern Ireland. That's the Catholic population up there, most of whom support the IRA, although they will admit it in public. But somebody keeps running the guns to the IRA, and somebody opens the doors to help them run through alleys when they're being chased by the police and so on. And then we get the Irish point of view. And so there's no such, living in Ireland for 6 years, there's no such thing as a news story. What there is the English news story, the Northern Irish news story, and the Irish news story. And all 3 of those happen to agree in one way, that they tend to report events in the Near East in a way that seems fairly impartial to me. They give the Israeli side and the Arab side about equal time. And the first thing you notice when you get back to the United States is the Arab side has ceased to exist. The media here has never heard that the Arabs have anything to be said on their side at all. So that's a 4th reality tunnel. This is the Irish, the English, the Northern Irish, and the American. Give you 4 different reality tunnels on the Near East. On Irish television, we hear a great deal about the crimes being committed by the terrorists in Central America that are supported by the CIA. In this country, you hear comparatively little about that. You very seldom hear that they're supported by the CIA. So again, there are different reality tunnels about what's going on. The people down in Central America have an entirely different reality tunnel about what's happening to them, I'm sure. I've been told what most of them believe down there is that there's a war going on between rival gangs of cocaine smugglers, and the United States keeps giving money to whichever gang of cocaine smugglers convinces them they're most likely to support the American corporations there. Maybe that's what's, quote, really going on. There is a 10th planet beyond Pluto. 1/4 of the class rejected that. Anybody want to explain why you rejected that? You're getting a little fogged over. It's time for a break. Maybe it's time for lunch. So it's just about 12 o'clock. What do you think? Do we do another hour and then take a lunch break, or do we take a break and go to lunch? Okay, but we're going to take a break now, because if nobody puts their hand up, that means you're going into a trance. Get up, walk around, stretch a little. Chippy chips. I think 2 people have been on the Max so far, or is it 3? At least
4 now. He's number 4.
Well, he just started. I want to. What the hell are the? We got 2 of the.
We fell on a time warp.
Yeah, they projected into a parallel universe. I would like reports from the people who tried the Endomax.
Okay.
Get up and address the class instead of me.
It sort of felt like kind of a cross between a marijuana high and a mild psychedelic buzz that was kind of sweet. But that's so. For those of you who tried drugs, that will.
Could you state it in language for people who aren't?
I felt kind of charged. I felt. I don't drink coffee, so I guess I can't describe what that would be like compared to coffee. But just my face wanted to grin a lot, and it just felt like my head was kind of. I could feel like a chemical change in my head. It felt kind of electrified. It still does. I'm not quite as high as I was when I first took it off, but for a long time after I took the machine off, for like probably about 30, 40 minutes now, since I took it off, I still had the same effect. And it was a gradual buildup. It wasn't like soon as I put it on, I felt something. I didn't really feel anything happening. I just felt like a gradual change taking place.
How long did it take for this to be a constant for everybody when it changed?
It took me about 10 minutes before I started really noticing what, it's like I was coming on, and then it stayed with me for about 3 months.
I'm sure anybody else was it.
No, I wouldn't do that. I didn't,
But I was pretty tired. And so I was kind of like this, and now I'm like wide awake. So,
Like something the government would like to make it.
Then we can make it more expensive.
Oh yeah, there's big bucks to be made in making this illegal. Once it's illegal, the prices can go sky high.
Have you ever heard of the theory that the mafia was behind keeping a lot of things illegal so they could keep?
Oh yeah, I've heard that theory. Lenny, I believe in always learning as much as I can from everybody, especially the people I disagree with. And I disagree with Lenin about most things. One thing Lenin said, he was very fond of the Latin proverb or catchphrase, cui bono, who profits? Who's making something out of it? And for years I thought we've got these stupid anti-drug laws because there are so many stupid people abroad in the land these days. And then I said, well, I'll try another reality tunnel. I started looking at it from a Lenin Marxist point of view. And it's very obvious that there are people not only in the mafia, but in banking and several other fields who are getting richer and richer and richer every year by keeping these laws on the books. And then again, it may not be stupidity at all. It may be a very high level of intelligence. It just happens to lack ethics. Because the price of keeping a junkie happy every day is around 50 cents. If heroin were legal, it were manufactured legally, enough to keep a junkie high, but it would be around 50 cents. And so we wouldn't have all of the crime that's being committed by junkies now.
Cops would be out of business.
Well, the vice squad, of course, they would have to be reassigned to dealing with violent criminals, which would be dangerous. And but the price of keeping a junkie high and happy nowadays runs around $200 a day, which means that they got to steal, except for the female junkies who can prostitute themselves. But the male junkies generally have to steal, which means they have to steal $400 a day, because you got to steal about $400 worth of merchandise to get $200 from an underworld fence. And since there are around 100,000 junkies in the country, or is it higher than that now? I think it's rising steadily. Well, let's say 100,000 junkies times $400, that's $4 million a day they got to steal from the rest of us. That comes to 300, rounding it out, 300 times 4 is 1,200, so that's $1.2 billion a year they got to steal from the rest of us. Now this is so clear and obvious, I can't believe the majority is so stupid they can't add and subtract. Everybody who has an apartment with a fireplace leading into it has a very keen idea of what this costs us every year. Why, there's hardly anybody in the country who hasn't been ripped off yet. As far as I can see, the only reason for keeping that law on the books is that it does enrich the people who sell the heroin, which the mafia has the biggest monopoly, but the CIA has a big piece of the action, and the banks that are laundering the money are getting a big piece of the action. Down in Miami a couple of years ago, the World Finance Corporation, a large Miami bank run by 3 former CIA agents. The president was Hernandez Mejia, who worked on the Bay of Pigs invasion with Gordon Liddy and H. Howard Hunt, and that whole gang was the president, and the 2 other former or allegedly former CIA agents on the board of directors. The DA said that was the biggest drug laundromat they had ever uncovered in the United States. And they were processing billions of dollars a year in drug money, which was going to the Cisalpine Bank in the Bahamas, which was run by Roberto Calvi, the president of Banco Ambrosiano in Milan, and Archbishop Paul Marcinkus, the president of the Vatican Bank in the Vatican. And the money went from the Cisalpine Bank run by Calvi and Marcinkus into the Banco Ambrosiano, and then most of it went into the Vatican Bank, whereupon it disappeared because the Vatican Bank is the economic equivalent of a black hole. Those of you who are hip to general relativity know that nothing ever gets out of a black hole, and nothing that goes into the Vatican Bank can ever be traced any further, because the Vatican is a sovereign state. Italian bank examiners cannot examine the books of the Vatican Bank. The only people that can examine the books of the Vatican Bank are the president of the Vatican Bank and his associates, all of whom are under indictment in Italy for laundering all this drug money and for engaging in stock and currency frauds. A few of them have been brought to trial, but the top ones, like Archbishop Marcinkus, won't come out of the Vatican, so they can't be put on trial. An Italian court has ruled they can't extradite Marcinkus from the Vatican. The public prosecutor is appealing that to a higher court. He wants to drag Marcinkus out of the Vatican and put him on trial. In the meanwhile, under the rules of the legal game, we must assume Archbishop Marcinkus was innocent and he thought they were dealing in baby boobies all that time. Roberto Calvi, who was Marcinkus' partner in this, ran the Banco Ambrosiano in Milan, as I said. Calvi was indicted in Italy for about 100 counts of stock and currency fraud, drug laundering, and conspiracy to overthrow the government. He was found hanging from a bridge in London on June 18th, 1982, with his pockets full of bricks, where the rising tide had covered his dead body. Any of you remember that? I've got a lot of publicity in Europe, less publicity over here.
Blackfriars Bridge?
Yeah, Blackfriars Bridge in London, that's right. His method of death, hanging where the tide covered his body, that's in the first degree Masonic oath, that's the punishment threatened to those who betray their fellow Masons. Which clearly indicates that Calvi was murdered by Masons or by people who devoutly wish us to think he was murdered by Masons. There's one book claims he was killed by the mafia for double-crossing them in one of the heroin deals. His wife has always claimed the Vatican killed him because he was planning to factor Italy to turn state's evidence. There's a book by Stephen Knight who claims the Masons did kill him and left their trademark on it because they knew they couldn't be prosecuted in England because everybody in Scotland Yard is a Freemason. That book has a mild tinge of paranoia. Calvi and Marcinkus were in business with Nicolae Sindona and Licio Gelli. Nicolae Sindona ran the Franklin National Bank in New York, which went bankrupt when it was discovered that Sindona had embezzled $55 million from the bank's funds and had been engaging in massive stock and currency fraud, as well as dealing in drugs. One of the principal mafia families in New York printed $1 billion in counterfeit stock, which Sindona fenced through the Vatican Bank, and it's disappeared. Only 100 million of the billion have been found, so there's 900 million counterfeit stocks floating around Europe. And they're very useful because if you buy a counterfeit stock knowing it's counterfeit, you might get away with it. You deposit this in the bank. If it's big enough, you get a line of credit equal to that. If your business is in trouble, a lot of marginal businessmen are in the counterfeit stock business. If your business is marginal, you get a new line of credit, you get enough money into the business, you might save the business, you pull out okay, you're ahead of the game, and you sell the counterfeit stock to somebody else who needs a dodge for a couple of weeks. If you can have your rollover in a couple of weeks, you won't get caught. If the counterfeit stock stays in the bank too long, a bank examiner might eventually spot it as clear. But a lot of people do deal in them on the hopes that they can make a rapid rollover. Sindona was convicted in New York of 65 counts of stock and currency fraud, faking his own kidnapping, drug dealing, and other things. He was extradited to Italy, where he was convicted of murdering a bank examiner. He was awaiting trial for conspiracy with Calvi and Gelli and Archbishop Marcinkus in the Bologna railway bombing of 1981, which was a project of Pei Due, which was the secret society to which Calvi and Gelli and Sindona and Marcinkus belonged. Pei Due had 900 agents in the Italian government, according to papers found in Gelli's home when he fled Italy. Gelli had so many agents in the police department that when they indicted him, he was notified immediately and got out of Italy before the cops would come and arrest him. The word got to his house faster than the cops would travel to his house to arrest him as soon as the indictment was issued by the judge. He fled to Uruguay. They found there were 900 members of Pei Due in the Italian government at that time. The government fell. The next government was prosecuting Pei Due. Up until it was discovered they had several hundred members of Pei Due too, so that government fell. The third government since then is in trouble because they've discovered a lot of Pei Due members within that. Pei Due was a secret society within the Grand Orient Lodge of Egyptian Freemasonry in Italy. Gelli got to the third degree of the Grand Orient and then founded his own secret group within the Grand Orient. I think he'd been reading my novels or something. He read the history of the Illuminati in Bavaria. Anyway, he had a secret society within Egyptian Freemasonry, and they were taking money from the CIA and from the KGB. The CIA was paying Gelli to murder Italian labor union leaders who wouldn't follow the American line. The KGB was paying him to spy on the CIA and tell him everything he knew about the CIA. Odessa, which is the secret society of former Nazi war criminals who are still wanted in Europe, Odessa was paying him to create new identities for them. And he found most of them jobs with the CIA in Central America, like Boss Barbie is the most famous case. Richard Galen was put in charge of the CIA's Russian branch. He was in charge of running a whole bunch of white Russian agents who were telling him the usual white Russian propaganda line, to which he would add his Nazi propaganda line, and then this would get fed back to the computers in Arlington, and that's how the CIA makes up their reality tunnel of what's going on in Russia. If you wonder why the CIA is a little weird. But in all of this all these merry pranks and masquerades, what's going on is that everybody's getting rich out of cocaine and heroin, including Chase Manhattan Bank, through which a lot of this money flows too. And all of this comes from, I didn't make up any of it. if, let's see if I can turn this over for a minute. That was a rather lengthy digression, but I found it fascinating. Anybody who's interested, Penny Lerno in Banks We Trust. Larry Gerwin, The Calvi Affair. David Yallop in God's Name. And my R.A.W., The Widow's Son, which doesn't have much original research in it, but it gives you a long reading list where you can find out more about Paidue, the Vatican Bank, and the CIA, and who's getting rich off cocaine and heroin. So I don't think it's stupidity that these laws stay on the books, to finish that long digression. How did I get onto that digression anyway?
Dave was describing his trip on the...
Oh yeah, I was like...
And whether they should be made illegal soon.
Yeah, I don't think the Mafia and the CIA are smart enough to realize the profits. These are being widely used in hospitals, machines in this family. They're coming into use as a very widespread treatment for hypertension. And I don't think it's going to work the way the drug thing did. But I've been wrong before. Remember the cosmic schmuck principle. I'm a cosmic schmuck part of the time. These may be highly illegal next year, and people may be running around smuggling them in and out of the country. I don't know. How did you feel about the Endomax?
Well, I didn't have it on as long because I was afraid something was going to happen.
Oh, we don't want anything to happen. You're supposed to come out exactly the way you came in. No change whatsoever.
I just didn't want to lose my train of thought. But I kind of liked it. But I wonder where you can find it.
Anybody who wants to buy one.
She kept looking over me and seeing me grinning like this. I was like, I don't want to do that.
Are those numbers clear? 213-390-2388. That's Los Angeles. And that's where you can buy them. They sell for $212. And with somebody, with the next witness who cares to testify before this religious group get up and tell about their experience with the Endomax, while I take a brief break, I'll be right back.
I don't think I had it on long enough, and I think that it needed more connecting fluid because I really experienced it. What was in it? It's just salt water. It just helps it digest better. Yeah. So I gave up because I was irritated trying to hold it on my head.
Oh, well, I left it on for about 20 minutes. I don't feel like burning. I feel real full of energy. I would say my head feels kind of light, and I was having just a couple moments of visual effects of the wood grain. Again, it would have chemical analogs in my experience.
Do you see your body kind of tingles though? Do you get kind of tingles?
Yeah, it's really interesting. Up and down the extremities. Yeah, there's kind of a rush. Yeah, pretty.
Well, when I used it, I found, as Joel said, my mind was going faster than my mouth could, and so I couldn't talk very efficiently.
You were doing jumping jacks.
Yeah, well, yeah, we were all at a party.
You were on fast forward, weren't you?
Yeah, I was on fast forward, so I was getting a harmonic of the stimulant tape. And it was just everybody wanted to go home and go to sleep, and I was just revved up. And,
yard work.
Intensification of the visual field. It was a mildly speed-like experience, but not with the sort of must get attention to have experience on speed.
I did a session on it yesterday, about 40 minutes, and it was a different tape that's in there now. It's an endorphin tape. And I just kind of relaxed and closed my eyes and sort of felt like a tingling in the back of my head and like a real sense of calm and inner peace. And as I just relaxed a little bit further, I could see like helix shapes and different colors and stuff. And after I took the machine off, I like felt waves of it come on again, like afterwards, like just like a mild, pleasant electrical current going through my body. It was really pleasant.
When you say it's a tape, is it a sound recording or is it an electrical charge?
I think
Not,
the tape's
not an
down.
audio tape. As you see, I'm using
Yeah,
it
it's not
as
audio.
we
If
speak.
you turn the volume all the way down, and it's
Is it a tape? What's the tape do on that?
The tape creates a rhythm, a sound rhythm. The adapter converts that into electrical impulses against your mastoids. The hypothalamus is located between the mastoids. The hypothalamus is the part of the brain that controls the neuropeptide system. The neuropeptide system has a lot of interesting chemicals in it. The most interesting, the one we know the most about right now is the endorphins, but the neuropeptides are several dozen variations on the basic endorphin thing. Some of them are quite different. The neuropeptide system is different from the regular nervous system. It works slower, which is why people say it takes about 20 minutes after they're off the machine before they get the major effects. The effects continue for hours afterwards. The neuropeptide system functions within the brain and the body. Within the brain, it functions as neurotransmitters. It has two forms, just like light in quantum physics has two forms. It's a wave and a particle, both. The neuropeptides act as neurotransmitters and hormones. As neurotransmitters, they run around the brain forming new networks. So you have new perceptions, new ideas, new brain networks. So you're starting to create a bigger and more interesting reality tunnel. As hormones, they're running around the body enhancing the immunological system. So the general effect is to make you more immune to diseases in general, and sometimes to even lessen the effects of the disease you happen to have at the time. No medical claims are made for these machines because if they were, the FDA would be down on the manufacturers like a ton of bricks. But we do know from neuropeptide research that neuropeptides do enhance the immunological system. So by and large, the effect on the health will be good, although nobody is daring to make any specific claims because of the legal problems. And we need more research anyway. Yes?
Is this something you use every day or once a week or twice a day?
At first, people tend to use them every day, and then they begin to feel I'm not getting any more out of it, and they stop. And sometimes, they're putting new tapes out all the time. You may feel you got everything you can get out of one tape, and you may, after a few weeks, decide, well, that was so good, I'll see what I can do with another tape. So you start all over again, using it every day, learning a new brain frequency. By and large, they work as entrainment devices. After you learn to go to these very different brain rhythms, you can do it quite spontaneously without using the machine. And you've got a whole variety of new brain programs you were never trained in before. Dr. Graham, who had the brain potentializer at the lecture last night, he claims that one leads to a rise in IQ that can be measured very precisely. I don't guarantee that claim, but that's his major claim. He says no other machine has been tested like this one so rigorously with third generation EEG technology, and it definitely raises the IQ 10 to 20 points. Others do a lot of other interesting things. This whole field, to me, opens up the possibility that the next generation of such brain machines will make it possible for anybody to turn their brain to any level they want to go to. And we're not stuck with the brains we were born with. We can improve our brain continuously throughout life. I find that a tremendously exciting evolutionary turning point.
You've used the pulse star a lot. Right?
Mhm.
Now you can actually dial and tune the frequencies on that as opposed to what this does.
That's right. With the pulse star, you can dial 10.5, which is, according to research so far, that's the self-healing frequency. And I've had a lot of people try 10.5 and report a diminishment or a total abolition of disease conditions that were bothering them. I can say that because I'm not selling the pulse star, and the manufacturer isn't saying it himself, but it does seem to work out that way with 10.5. You can get a tape at 10.5 for the Endomax too.
Does Michael Hutchinson go into the medical aspect?
Yes, Hutchinson's Megabrain has pretty good coverage of the whole field. He read hundreds of papers and synthesizes them in that book.
If you only had about $300 to spend and you could only have one of these machines, which would you recommend?
Testimonial, yeah.
Which would I recommend? I don't know all of them. This field is growing so rapidly. The ones I know, I'd recommend the Endomax. Besides, he's adding new tapes all the time, so the Endomax is continually growing and improving.
What's the potential for like really exploring or really wigging yourself out on these? I mean, you can do like the low frequencies or whatever. I mean, because you were talking about out-of-body experiences on certain frequencies. And, is that something, be able to train yourself to be able to do?
So far in the literature and in anecdotal testimony I've picked up around the country, I haven't heard any reports of people wigging out of these things like a lot of people wigged out with acid or other psychedelics. It seems if by any chance you get to a frequency you don't like, you turn the machine off, and it's not the insistent, obsessing, captivating thing that a drug trip is. It tends to go away.
Yeah, but what if people who do fear those things find out that the person who made the pulsar, Hercules, died of a heart attack? That could be used as a negative sort of thing to say, see, he was using that brain machine too much, and now those lower brain waves and wigged out his body. There's that kind of... How do you kind of get beyond that sort of,
Oh, you mean, why am I not paranoid about the machines? Because Mike had a...
Well, how do you convince other people not to be paranoid?
Well, people die all the time. People using every type of therapy die. Mike is the first researcher in that field to have died. Nobody in the field ever claimed this was going to lead to immortality immediately. If you look into Mike Hercules' life, the pulse star seems to have done him a lot of good. He had a heart attack before he invented the pulse star. After the pulse star, he got back into what all of his friends considered really radiant good health and a magnificently high, cheerful attitude. And he grew hair over his bald spot, which got a lot of people very interested in the pulse star. The balder they were, the more interested they were after that happened. Then he had a stroke, and he got out of the hospital in record time. He went from bed to crutches to walking without crutches in only about 3 weeks, and completely baffled the doctors. It was one of the most amazing recoveries from a stroke ever seen.
I'm surprised they let him use his machine.
They did. Well, it's being researched at the University of Denver, and he lives in Boulder, and everybody in that area is more or less aware of his research. He got, after the stroke, after he recovered from that, he went to Mexico and spent the summer scuba diving. And at that point, he was convinced that using the low frequencies on the machine rejuvenated the immunological system to the point that it kicked off any disease. And he also believed that allopathic medicine interferes with the working of the immunological system, so he discontinued all the allopathic medicine. That's the kind of drugs that American doctors prescribe, as distinguished from homeopathic medicine, which is a different theory and is practiced in some parts of Europe. Anyway, he stopped all of his medication and counted on the machine to keep him in good health, and he said he did make a great recovery from the stroke and was doing fine, and suddenly he dropped dead on the street in Boulder. And the lesson I learned from that is not to be paranoid about all these machines, but if you have a serious heart condition, don't give up your allopathic medicine. Don't rely entirely on the machine. That's the conclusion I drew from it.
Do you know if anyone's doing research with these machines on AIDS patients?
Yes, but unfortunately, the guy who's doing it is not very scientifically oriented and not very well trained and so on, but it is being done casually in Los Angeles. There are a bunch of AIDS patients who are being treated with the endomax, and all that can be said so far is that they're a lot more cheerful most of the time. Whether they're going to live longer than other AIDS patients remains to be seen, and if this guy is going to keep careful enough scientific records also remains to be seen. So, we were up to, there is a 10th planet in this solar system beyond Pluto, and 1/4 of the class rejected that, 3/4 accepted it. I want somebody who accepted it to explain why you believe there's a 10th planet there.
Because it says so in Schrodinger's cat, and everything in Schrodinger's cat is true.
Oh my God, somebody believes something before because it was in the book. Now somebody's believing something because it's in me. The main message of my books is don't believe me. Yes.
Well, ever since I was a child, you read about it in the newspaper that scientists say that the Pluto has certain changes in its orbit, which might indicate there's an outer planet. And I also read a book, and somebody probably also read The 12th Planet, that tells about the ancient Babylonian, Akkadian, and Chaldean civilizations that counted 12 planets. That was the 9 planets we know about, the sun, the moon, and then another outer planet, which was the planet of the gods. And they also knew about Pluto and Neptune, which were discovered by modern man until, Pluto was the 20s. And they knew about all those planets, plus another one. So that's, some of you other probably read that book too.
Didn't they name the last planet Charon?
What?
Another kid or something? Charon, the name that they've given to the 10th planet?
Some astronomers are calling it that, yeah, Charon. I name it Mickey. I'm hoping to find an 11th and call that one Goofy. So it'll make a nice crescendo effect. Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, asteroids, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, Mickey, and Goofy. I think the kids would love to memorize that. That's easy to memorize. Some people...
It's theoretical, but it's scientific proof. I said no because I don't know any scientific proof.
Is it scientifically or even philosophically wise to say either yes or no? Right now it's at the stage where there's good mathematical arguments that should be there, but nobody has seen it yet. A lot of astronomers are looking
for quite a
for
while
it.
before they found it. Possible, but not proven.
That's right, it's possible but not proven. Just like Pluto was before, wasn't it? Right. So it might be part of our reality tunnel in the near future, or it might not. Anatole Rappaport, mathematician, part-time physicist, and part-time biologist, general all-around Renaissance character. He has created the word indeterminate. Well, he hasn't created the word indeterminate, but he's applied the mathematical word indeterminate to statements like that, of which there are quite a few. Barnard's star has planets. That's believed for mathematical reasons, but it hasn't yet been telescopically confirmed. The other side of the moon, no, we have flown around the moon now. There are lots of indeterminate statements. I have over $100 in my wallet. That's an indeterminate statement because I haven't looked at my wallet in a couple of days, and I'm not sure I kept track of what I've spent. There are lots of indeterminate statements. So Aristotelian true-false logic doesn't include that. If you're within the Aristotelian framework, you tend to try to force an indeterminate statement to be true or false, and you can frequently get into heated arguments. Yes, it is true. No, it isn't true. But if we recognize that there are indeterminate cases, we're out of the Aristotelian straitjacket. So true is only relatively true. The scientific truth relative to the instruments of the age. We don't know what the instruments invented in the 90s are going to show. What we call scientific truth now is just relative to the degree of instrumentation we've arrived at. There are mathematical truths, which are not truths at all. They're just game rules. They're valid if the game is intelligently constructed. There are legal truths, which may or may not be true. They become true because 12 people selected at random decided so, but they could be wrong. There are historical truths, which may just be the lies of the winning side for all we know. And now we find things that are neither true nor false, but indeterminate things. How about PQ equals QP? We got 3/4 accepted that and 1/4 rejected it. Yes.
Another mathematical game rule.
That's another mathematical game rule, that's right. It's true in one system of algebra, it's not true in another. It's the basic statement of the commutative rule, which is true in commutative algebra, but not true in non-commutative algebra. The interesting thing is the reciprocal of that, well, the negation of it, I should say. PQ does not equal QP. That is the basic starting point of Hamiltonian or non-commutative algebra, and that's the algebra that applies to the quantum level. PQ equals QP only works in the grocery store. If you buy 10 apples at 5 cents each, it costs you exactly as much as if you had bought 5 apples at 10 cents each. That's the commutative rule. And we're all so used to that, we think that's something that's inviolable. It must be true everywhere, but it's only true in grocery stores and bank ledgers and economic life in general. Inside the atom, PQ does not equal QP. It's totally non-commutative. This is a fascinating example of the power of the human brain to do things it doesn't even know it's doing. When Hamilton created that algebra, nobody knew what it was good for. It took 100 years to find out it was the best algebra for quantum physics. Marilyn Monroe. Now we turn to something that my heart could really warm to. I will quote you a sentence from an article I wrote about Marilyn in an Irish newspaper about a year ago. She was as beautiful as the Parthenon by moonlight, as goofy as a surrealist painting, and as impossible to ignore or forget as a kangaroo in a symphony orchestra. The unforgettable Marilyn. Marilyn Monroe is the most beautiful woman who ever lived. 1/10 of the class have the good sense to agree with that. The other 9/10 had dissenting and therefore perverse views of the matter. Is it true? Is it true that Marilyn Monroe is, well, 9 out of 10 people in the class think it wasn't true. Well, is it false?
No, not for me.
No, it's neither true nor false. It's not indeterminate. An indeterminate thing like the 10th planet, that will be determined eventually when we have the space telescope goes up in the next couple of years. Then we'll be able to tell. So it's neither true nor false nor indeterminate. So a 3-valued logic with 4 subsets of 1 value, so that makes it already a 7-valued logic, but it has to be increased to include another category. I suggest we call that self-reflexive. Self-reflexive statements are absolutely true, provided the person making them isn't lying deliberately. They're absolutely true, but they're only true for that person. They're statements about how that person's nervous system arranges things in the universe. Rock is just a lot of loud noise. Is that true or false? It's absolutely true for somebody who really means it, but it's not true for the people who enjoy rock. This is a sexist movie. I get into fights with feminists about that. They're willing to recognize that these principles apply to everything else except that. This is a sexist movie. Obviously, it's a self-reflexive statement. All such statements should be reformulated. If we wanted to think carefully, accurately, existentially, about our relationship with space-time, we'd have to put the observing instrument into self-reflexive statements. So all those self-reflexive statements should be more clearly stated as Marilyn Monroe seemed like the most beautiful woman in the world to my nervous system, or to be short, to me. And rock sounds like a lot of meaningless noise to me. And Beethoven seems better than Mozart to me. All of those statements, you can't argue with them. A person is just telling you how their nervous system operates. This is a sexist movie to me. There's no point arguing about them, and yet people do spend, this is one of the major indoor entertainments of the intellectual classes, is arguing about statements like that as if they refer to some kind of objective or etic reality. And they're only referring to what's going on in the nervous system of the speaker. And we got a lot more things here to classify, but before we go on with that, since that gets rather pedantic and a bit tedious, I want to go back to where we started. Everybody came through the same hallway, in quotes, the same. Yet everybody created their own reality tunnel. Everybody had a different worlds, all turning in different directions. I would like to try another little demonstration of how universal this principle of the comparative reality tunnels is. I would like everybody to get comfortable, especially whoever has the Endomax on right now. Get comfortable, but as they say in all the books on yoga, embraced. Don't slump. Be embraced and alert. Get comfortable. Now, I'm going to ask you to listen for a certain period of time to see how many different sounds you hear. And when I tell you this, when I say start listening to the sounds. If you want to include start among your sounds, you can, although I think that's a strange loop and confusing the game. When I say stop, the game is over, so you shouldn't include stop within the game either, unless you really want to. But while in between the start and the stop, just listen and see how many different sounds you hear. Does everybody understand what I'm asking? Nobody's confused?
Did you want us to go in the hallway?
No, I want you to sit erect in your chairs. What is this, a Rodney Dangerfield audience? Okay, when I say start. Don't go away. Don't start fantasizing or talking to yourself. Stick with the sounds. stop. Okay, how many people heard more than 10 sounds? How many people heard more than 20? Okay, we got 2 hands back there that had more than 20. Okay, do you want to give me 20 sounds? Yes, sir.
Something like about the 18 cars passing. Each time they pass, also heard the reflection of the sound off the wall of the building.
Echo.
Also heard half a dozen birds chirping.
6 birds.
Ventilation fan.
Ventilation.
You talked twice. A couple of times I heard people move their chairs or move their seats.
People move chairs.
There's someone's breath.
Somebody breathing.
Heard motorcycle.
Motorcycle.
And motorcycle. I like that if you include each individual car.
Oh yeah, 18 cars. Car 1, car 2, car 3, car 4, etc. Okay, that's the, we got a memory champ of the class who remembered more of the, well, now we got a oral listening champ of the class who heard more sounds than anybody else. Now, how many of you heard sounds that he didn't hear? Put your hands up all the way. Look around.
It's the whole class.
It's the whole class again. Should I go through with the rest of the demonstration? 2y equals 2x plus z and show it where he's at again? No, I think you're getting the point. I want to try something different instead. How long was that experiment?
About 2 minutes.
2 minutes. 30 seconds. 1 minute.
2 minutes, 30 seconds.
2 minutes, 30 seconds. 5 minutes.
2 minutes.
Okay, a couple of votes for 2
1 minute, 30
minutes.
seconds.
1 minute, 30 seconds.
3 minutes.
3 minutes.
125.9.
Okay, let's take a vote on it. How many say 30 seconds? That's 1. How many say 1 minute? That's about 10. How many say, oh, we got that twice.
1 minute,
How
30.
many-
1 minute, 30.
Oh, 1 minute 30, yeah. How many say that? That seems to be close to 10 also. 2 minutes. Let's say close to 10. 2 minutes, 30 seconds. 3 minutes. Oh, that's interesting. There was a valley there, and then it rises again. That was about 8, roughly. 5 minutes. 1. The aim of this workshop is to demonstrate that we are all greater artists than we realize. We're all creating our own reality tunnels. Now, in the course of that experiment, some of you lived 30 seconds. One of you lived 15 minutes, 5 minutes, and the majority of you lived around between 1 minute and 2 minutes. Who had the real time? Will the person with the real time please stand up?
Who's Mark?
You not only create the colors, the sounds, the meaning, the emotional tone, the forms, the shapes, you create the time in which you're living too. Who is the great Zen koan, who is the master who makes the grass green? Does anybody have any doubt of the answer anymore? Okay, that concludes the morning's entertainment. We now have the lunch break, and in the afternoon we'll go back to classifying the rest of these and see how much further we can get beyond Aristotelian logic. We've got 4 true values and 2 values that are between true and false, and we're not finished yet.
How long?
How long? How long?
Lifetime.
2 minutes.
How long should the lunch break be?
Some people should go for 5 minutes.
I think we should take 45 minutes.
I say an hour.
Yeah.
We're far from any civilized eating place, so.
After 30 seconds, you're like,
Those are headlines like you see.
Yeah. There are a lot of mystical offshoots of Masonry in the United States. There's the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, with which I am loosely affiliated. I can't seem to escape my affiliation with it, but manifesting in my life is the Ordo Templi Orientis, which is a condensation of Masonry and tentative, which will allow rituals deliberately intended as an occult school. I'm loosely affiliated with that. Christopher Hyatt, the head of the Golden Dawn, was asked, is Robert Anton Wilson a member of your order? And he said, Wilson belongs to all orders and nuns. And I'll accept that as a good definition. Does anybody want any more about Freemasonry? Okay, we've taken care of Freemasonry. Now, I find a totally inscrutable note here. We're working our way through these propositions. MM is Marilyn Monroe, PQ is equals QP is the commutative law of one type of algebra. I know colorless means the colorless green ideas. What the hell is this metropolis in here? Or is it metropolis? I can't even read my own.
That's the fish.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's a good one. Yeah. Oh, yes. Down, 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 under the ground, under the floating villages, turns the moon chained and water-bound metropolis of fishes. Land, 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 nothing remains of the pacing famous sea but its speech, and into its talkative 7 tombs the anchor dives through the floor of the church. Goodbye, good luck, struck the sun and moon to the fisherman lost on the land. He stands alone at the door of his home with his long-legged heart in his hand. True or false? The first time around, two guys thought it was true, and the third thought it was false. Well, before we scrutinize that further, I'll tell you a little parable I based. Does anybody know where that comes from? Just out of curiosity. Does anybody recognize it? No, it's not Finnegan's Wake. That's a good guess.
The TSL?
No, it's Dylan Thomas. It's the last 3 verses of the Ballad of the Long-Legged Bait by Dylan Thomas. And he's often been called the equivalent in poetry of Finnegan's Wake, so that wasn't a bad guess. I said Finnegan's Wake. I recently was asked to write an afterword to a book by Scott Appel, who was a friend of Phil Dick's. And how many people here are aware of Phil Dick and his writings? How many are aware of the last years of Phil Dick? Mysteries surrounding his...
I've heard stories of this.
Yeah, well, in 1973, Phil thought he was receiving communications from extraterrestrials. Then later he decided it was Russian telepaths that were broadcasting messages into the heads of influential people in the United States. Then later he decided he was just going crazy. Then later he decided it was God communicating with him. He kept changing his mind about what was going on. He considered that he was taking so many mega vitamins that he had blown a hole in the corpus callosum, and the right brain was feeding directly into the left brain, that I find useful for some of my weird experiences. Phil wrote several novels that were very thinly disguised accounts of his transpersonal visions and trans-space and trans-time data that was pouring into him. And then he wrote a letter which he sent to 90 of his friends, including me. I was one of the lucky ones who got this. weird letter in which he announced that Jesus Christ was alive in Sri Lanka, and he was going to Sri Lanka to find Jesus and persuade him to declare himself and bring the world to peace. And then he announced at the end of the letter that this wasn't his opinion at all. It was the opinion of Horse Lover Fat, who's a character in one of Phil's novels. So he kind of left us up in the air as to whether he believed that or not. And then he died, and immediately rumors sprang up that he was living in Amsterdam, that he was in Boston. He was reported all over the world. It was a great controversy among Phil Dick fans and science fiction fans in general as to whether he was alive or not. The Phil Dick Society finally, after extensive investigation, announced that his wife was at his funeral. They met other people who was at his funeral. They saw the corpse. They talked. They went to the trouble of interviewing the doctors in the hospital. Phil was definitely dead. So all those people who were seeing Phil Dick wandering around were either seeing his ghost or they had overactive imaginations. Then Phil started manifesting in the dreams of various science fiction writers, giving them plots for new books and ideas for new stories. Scott Appel was one of the people to whom Phil kept appearing. He kept appearing in dreams involving Disneyland. And Scott goes to Disneyland every year on New Year's Eve, so it was appropriate that Phil should communicate with him through Disneyland. There was Ray Faraday Nelson, who started a book with Phil once. Phil was appearing in his dreams and telling him to go ahead and finish the book, telling him how, giving him more ideas that he could let Phil take over, so it would be a true collaboration, not just a Nelson novel, but a Nelson Dick novel. And I was asked to write an afterword to this book, and my afterword I concluded by telling about an Oxford professor who got his degree in Dylan Thomas's works. And then he went down to Wales to look for the church, to find the church. Mentioned the anchor dives through the floor of the church into its talkative 7 tombs. The anchor dives through the floor of the church. And under there you find the metropolis of fishes. And he wandered all over Wales. He checked every church in Wales, and he never did find the church that had the metropolis of fishes underneath it and the anchor that crashed through its floor. As he came back to Oxford, he sat down to write a book on the theme, All Poets Are Damned Liars. He was about 2/3 of the way through that book, denouncing Dylan Thomas, who, by the way, is the one who inspired Bob Dylan to take that man. Denouncing Dylan Thomas in particular and poets in general. And one night the lights went out, and he had to go down to the cellar to change the fuse. So he went down to the cellar in the dark, carrying a candle down the creaky steps, brushing aside the cobwebs into the dank, dark cellar, looking for the fuse box. And wandering around in the dark of the cellar at about midnight, he suddenly heard a slurping sound behind him. Slurp. And he turned around slowly. He saw it. Well, you know what he saw. Everybody knows what he saw. Everybody except the Committee for Scientific Investigation of Claims of the Paranormal. So, now that I've given you all those clues, down, 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 under the ground, under the floating villages, turns the moon-chained and water-wound metropolis of fishes. Is that true or false? Or do we need other categories?
Other categories.
Other categories.
Yes and not no.
Okay, I suggest we call that poetry. Poetry. So now we've got scientifically relatively true, mathematically relatively true, legally relatively true, historically relatively true, indeterminate, like the 10th planet out beyond Pluto, self-reflexive, like Beethoven is better than rock, or rock is better than Beethoven, and now we've got poetry. And all of these tend to get jammed together into either true or false in our Aristotelian culture. Unless you're very careful, you get forced into talking about all these things as if they're true or false. Whereas it's much more flexible and suitable to our experience in space-time to have more categories like this. Now the next one is colorless green ideas sleep furiously. And 1/3 of the class accepted that as true. Would somebody who believes that colorless green ideas sleep furiously? Oh, we got a volunteer right away.
I've never come across a counterexample. I've never come across a green idea which didn't sleep furiously.
Oh, okay. All the colorless green ideas he's ever encountered sleep furiously. Does that convince the rest of you? Is there somebody here who believes that colorless green ideas don't sleep furiously who wants to dispute that? You've intimidated them all.
I've had many ideas that don't sleep furiously.
But were they green?
It's not enough to have colorless. I think they got to be colorless green ideas. Well, you all agree that it's true then?
I think it's a lie.
We had 2/3 rejected it originally.
Sounds pretty good.
Somebody said it's a lie.
Isn't that a category?
Oh yeah, I left one out in my samples that I usually use. In fact, I left 2 out. Let's see if I can squeeze them in somewhere. Francis Bacon wrote Hamlet. True or false? How many think it's true? That's about 1/3 of the class. How many? That means 2/3 think Francis Bacon didn't write Hamlet. Ronald Reagan wrote Hamlet. How many think that's true? Okay, that's 0.00001% as against 99.999% the other way. I think Ronald Reagan wrote Hamlet. Of course, it's possible that Ronald Reagan did write his own version of Hamlet when he was young, and then went stark staring sane and destroyed it before anybody could look at it and compare it with Shakespeare's version. By and large, except for the incorrigible heretic I seem to get in every class, we agree that that's a totally untrue statement. Ronald Reagan did not write Hamlet. We will pretend the heretic isn't here. Go on, we've got a new category now. The false. Ronald Reagan did not write Hamlet. To avoid further confusion, we'll say Ronald Reagan did not write the version of Hamlet attributed to Shakespeare. And not except for the heretic was grinning at me impudently. But we will all agree we found a definitely false statement. E equals 10 IR is a definitely false statement too. Even in a direct current system, you will virtually never get a case where the voltage equals 10 times the current times the resistance. So you can find definitely false statements to the conviction of virtually everybody. Except the saving remnant of wiseacres and people saw alike. Karl Popper, in a book called The Logic of Scientific Discovery, argues that to be scientifically meaningful, a statement has to be falsifiable. If you can't falsify a statement, then it doesn't have any scientific meaning whatsoever. He had to come up with that definition because he had earlier proven that science never proves anything. You can't prove any scientific law because that requires an infinite number of experiments, and we haven't conducted an infinite number of experiments yet. So only at the end of time, when time mutates into eternity, whatever that means, if it means anything, when we've reached the last ding-dong of doomsday, to quote Faulkner, then we might know something that's definitely scientifically true. In the meanwhile, all scientific laws are relatively true. But we can falsify things. Yes?
Can you recommend a good place to start with Karl Popper? I've never really been able to get into his stuff.
The Open Society and its Enemies. That's a very good place to start with Karl Popper. And so we do have false statements. And we've got various kinds of relatively true statements, but no absolutely true statements. And now we got around to colorless green ideas sleep furiously, and most people are willing to accept that as true. But it seems to me, since existentially it is impossible to encounter a colorless green idea, I've never encountered one, and I don't know anybody who can tell me with a straight face that they've encountered one. So as part of our experience, our existential experience in space-time, our being, as it were, colorless green ideas do not occur, and we don't know anything about their sleeping habits whatsoever. So that has to be classified as a meaningless statement.
Poetic.
It's got an alternate universe.
What about someone who's colorblind? They wouldn't know what green was. But would they know what the idea of sleeping?
You notice I put meaningless in quotes because, well, we'll come to that in a moment. I already had some objections before I even finished writing it. Yes?
What would you say is the distinction between poetry and meaninglessness?
It is not always perfectly clear. That's why I put meaningless in quotes.
So would both of those be self-reflexive categories?
They're all self-reflexive categories. I'm the one who's putting things into those categories. Other people might put statements into other categories. This is a self-reflexive system, but I think it's useful. Yes?
You commented that the meaningless statement didn't really refer to anything that we can experience with our sensory network. Perhaps, do you think that poetry tends to have more sensory reference?
Yes. I think almost everybody has stood at the door of his home with his long-legged heart in his hand at times. But the colorless green ideas are too recondite for me. The curious thing about colorless green ideas sleep furiously is it seems to be meaningless insofar as referring to existential events in space-time or operational events that can be scientifically measured. But it is meaningful in another sense. It illustrates Noam Chomsky. I didn't invent it, I got it from Noam Chomsky. And Noam Chomsky uses it to illustrate the fact that we can recognize a grammatical structure even if we can't make any sense out of the sentence. And everybody can recognize that that is a correct grammatical structure in English. Colorless green ideas sleep furiously is a correct grammatical structure, whereas colorless green ideas furiously would not be a correct structure in English. And so the meaningless is a very tricky category. And the meaningless was discovered by Ludwig Wittgenstein and a couple of others around the end of World War I who were working on the foundations of mathematics. There was a hope that they would be able to reduce mathematics to logic and show that mathematics is based on logic. And now we know what we're doing. We're not just inventing game rules. That collapsed because it turned out there's more than one kind of logic. And also because Wittgenstein demonstrated you can't reduce everything to logic because you find a whole bunch of meaningless statements at the foundations of mathematics. And then the logical positivists arose, and the logical positivists started going around declaring all sorts of statements meaningless. And this led to a counter-revolution, especially on the part of theologians, because most of what the logical positivists classified as meaningless were statements that theologians insisted did have meaning. The classic example of that is the Catholic doctrine of transubstantiation, which I believe I mentioned last night, did I not? Can somebody repeat the Catholic doctrine? By the way, there's a great Buñuel movie, I forget what it's called. There's a Buñuel movie with two guys on pilgrimage, and they encounter a priest, and they ask him to explain the doctrine of transubstantiation. And the priest explains it to them, and they're both very grateful now that they understand this sublime mystery of the faith. And then two hospital orderlies arrive and put a straitjacket on the priest and carry him away, leaving the pilgrims a little bit shaken in their faith. We're not going to put a straitjacket on you, honest. Anybody try to care to explain? I'm tired. I explained it last night. I don't want to explain it again. Somebody else explained the doctrine of transubstantiation.
Jesuits?
Yes. Are you a Jesuit? Hey, you didn't say you would explain transubstantiation, didn't you?
Yeah, take a piece of bread, and if the right guy, guaranteed heaven really, speaks the right words over it, it becomes the body and blood of the
Dead Jew.
extraterrestrial dead Jew from the Virgin.
Is that clear enough? Now, according to Aristotelian logic, that's either true or false. According to logical positivist criticism, it's neither true nor false, it's meaningless. It's meaningless because there's no operation you can perform existentially in space-time that will either prove it or refute it. It's defined so that everything you encounter in space-time, the smell of the bread, what the bread looks like under a microscope, the taste of the bread, everything you can possibly encounter with your senses or with anything to aid and magnify your senses, that's all accidents. The accidents remain the same, but the essence has changed. The essence has changed in the body and blood of Christ. So even though the accidents remain unchanged, the essence has changed, but scientifically that's meaningless because you can't measure the essence. Anything you can measure is the accidents. And so it doesn't make any difference whether you say it's the body and blood of Christ or if you say it's the hide of the Easter bunny. You can say this has been turned into the hide of the Easter bunny, and that's just as meaningful as saying it's been turned into the body and blood of Christ because there's no experiment that will prove it or refute it. Or you can say it's the sacred bones of Yod the Almighty, the ancient Babylonian god, and you can't prove or disprove that either. Or you can say it has 1,000 different essences in it. It has the essence of Doctors Howard, Fine, and Howard, otherwise known as Mo, Larry, and Curly, and it's also got the 7 dwarfs, and it's got all the bodhisattvas of the East all wrapped up in it. You can't prove or disprove any of those statements. Yes?
Would that include something like contradictory statements?
No, contradictory statements fall into another category. Contradictory statements may have meaningless terms in them, which may help make them contradictory, but contradictory statements are still yet another category we haven't gotten to yet. Before we leave the meaningless, Jonathan Swift in Gulliver's Travels has this account of a war between two gangs of religious fanatics. One holds you should break the egg from the round end, and the other says you should break the egg from the flat end. And that was Swift's parody of the religious wars that were going on in Europe at that time. What's really shocking from the point of view of modern linguistic analysis is that all these religious wars were being fought over meaningless statements. Statements that cannot be proven or disproven. It is rather weird that people will fight and kill each other, and not only in small groups like in Northern Ireland today, but millions and millions during the religious wars of the Middle Ages, and that is something being killed over whether that piece of bread really was the body of Christ or whether it just symbolized the body of Christ.